Senator Cruz is not going to be honest with you. He's going to make up positions and votes that I've never held or have ever taken. He's dishonest. It's why the president called him Lying Ted, and it's why the nickname stuck, because it's true.
It's clear Congressman O'Rourke's pollsters have told him to come out on the attack. So if he wants to insult me and call me a liar, that's fine. But, you know, John Adams famously said, facts are stubborn things. Have you noticed in his campaign, have you noticed in this debate, he doesn't talk about what he has accomplished in Congress, because he has scored political points rather than accomplishing victories for the people of Texas.
Listen, if you have this special relationship with President Trump, then where is the result of that? You are all talk and no action. All you've heard from Senator Cruz is what we should be afraid of. It's a campaign based on fear. It's the same person who shut down the government of the United States of America for 16 days, perhaps because he thought too many people had too much health care.
With Congressman O'Rourke leading the way, 2 years of a partisan circus shutting down the federal government in a witch hunt on the president, that's not good for the state of Texas. It's not good for our country.
Really interesting to hear you talk about a partisan circus after your last 6 years in the U.S. Senate.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz and Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke faced off last night in their second debate ahead of next month's election. Joining us now, founding president of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, Maria Teresa Kumar. And in Austin, Texas, professor at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, MSNBC contributor Victoria DeFrancesco Soto. Good to have you both on board. Victoria, how is this race looking in terms of the numbers and the polling that we're seeing out there?
So it is a mano, Mika. The polling has Cruz leading by about 8 to 9 points, but I don't think this is the number we should be focusing on. And here I'm putting on my political scientist cap, and I'm not doing it because of personal preferences. But the thing is that these polls that we're seeing are based on likely voters. And what we've seen since the last midterm election is 1.6 million new voters. And this has really been the focus of the Beto O'Rourke campaign. They have been going after these non-voters. They want to increase the electorate. They know they're not going to change the minds of a lot of GOP Texans, but they're going after folks who had not registered and who had not previously turned out to vote. So this is where all the money, the $38 million that he just raised, is going to knocking on doors time and time again. So when we include this 1.6 million, it's going to be within the margin of error. I'm not going to say that it's Beto O'Rourke's win, but it is going to be a lot closer than we're seeing in these polls, Mika.
And how's the money matching up on the Cruz side?
So in this last reporting period, we saw that Beto O'Rourke outraised Ted Cruz by 3 times. And keep in mind that Beto O'Rourke is not taking any PAC money. All of the money that he is raising is through individual donations. He has this rock star quality about himself. So he has these rallies. He goes across the state. He has been to every county. We have, I think, 256 counties here in Texas. So he has been a ruthless fundraiser in terms of mobilizing people, directing them to his website. And the money's been coming in. And folks here on the Republican side are getting very nervous, and we're seeing Texan corporate interests starting to pound money into the Cruz campaign.
So, Maria, obviously Beto O'Rourke has raised a ton of money. He sent a quarterly record, $38 million. There's an impression, and Ted Cruz touched on this last night, though, that he is a sort of a national candidate, that his support is coming from New York, it's coming from California, because he does have this rock star quality, as it was described by Victoria. What does it really look like inside of Texas, and where will Latino voters go in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks?
What's interesting is that disproportionately the people that they're registering are young Latino voters, Beto O'Rourke. So there's roughly 2.3 million young Latinos under the age of 29, and for the very first time, they seem incredibly engaged. The challenge, though, is that they're first-time voters, so getting them to the polls is going to be something that the Beto O'Rourke is really going to have to focus on. However, the fact that Cruz is saying that he's a national candidate is pretty rich, because that's actually the stage he wants to dominate. And when you look at who is funding him, it's individual donors for Beto, but it's the Koch brothers and Club for Growth for Cruz. So it gives you a juxtaposition of who's actually the most populist of the two, and it's that small dollar donor that once they donate, the more likelihood of them going to the polls is going to make all the difference. It's going to be close.
We have some new NBC News reporting that you're well aware of, that many Latinos may sit out the midterm elections. Obviously, immigration with family separation has been front and center in the national conversation. What are you looking at in terms of turnout with Latino voters? What will motivate them?
I will share with you the biggest challenge right now is that there is a lack of investment when it comes to connecting the connective tissue, that the only way you basically can solve for healthcare, the only way that you can basically solve for education, the only way that you can solve for the immigration crisis is actually bringing in a line of defense into Congress. The Latino community is disproportionately young. 60% of the Latino community is under the age of 33. The median age of a white voter is 54. The median age of a Latino is 18 years old. There is a ton of education that the Democratic Party, the Progressive Party, the Republican, they are just simply not doing on how the basic civic education of the branches of government work. And this is their chance to really explain that.
In Texas, how big of a problem is the, frankly, lack of Democratic infrastructure? I mean, the Democratic Party down there has sort of, withered away over the years.
Right. So this is the challenge, I think, with the progressive movement in general and the Democratic Party. They have really based a lot of their infrastructure following unions and union strongholds. In the places where there's the greatest opportunity right now, not just Latino voters, but young professionals leaving the Midwest, new industry leaving the Midwest, it's actually in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, and Arizona. Those are not union strongholds. So the Progressive Party really has to figure out how do they actually reimagine investment to actually capture that market opportunity.
So third quarter campaign fundraising reports were due this week, and Democrats have the clear upper hand. In the 45 most competitive U.S. House races, 71% of the Democrats outraised their Republican opponents. That's in 32 of the 45 districts. All told, in those races, Democrats brought in $154 million, while Republicans raised $108 million. In Georgia, despite ongoing accusations of voter suppression in the state, early voting there opened on Monday and set records. Across the state, 69,049 voters cast their ballots on the first day of in-person early voting. That's according to new numbers from the Georgia Secretary of State's office, with some voters waiting as many as 2 hours to cast a midterm ballot, which includes the closely watched governor's race between the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, and Democrat Stacey Abrams. That's a sharp increase from the last midterm election, when 20,989 people showed up on the first day of in-person early voting. When combined with mail-in ballots, a total of 129,458 Georgians have voted as of Monday. Early voting in Georgia ends on November 2nd. So when you put the money together with that early voting in Georgia, Sam, what do you see?
Well, I mean, obviously there's an immense amount of Democratic enthusiasm. You can suggest from that, looking at the data, does it translate into enough? I mean, we glossed over it in the script, but like what's happening in Georgia with respect to the voter suppression efforts is remarkable. The fact that people had to wait 2 hours online to vote in early voting is kind of a travesty in some respects. I mean, our government should be making it easier for people to vote, not setting up barriers. And so this is a huge problem that spans not just through Georgia, but other states as well, where you're seeing restrictions put up, you're seeing Secretary of State sit on ballots, registrations, I should say, and it could potentially have an impact on the midterm elections and denying Democrats some opportunities for gains.
Well, and it's been incredibly challenging because just the function of government, where the voter registration online in Florida and Texas has been down, it's almost, people are starting to internalize that and saying, is this by design? And we have to basically recognize that the power of our democracy is maximum participation. When has voter registration been partisan? It never should be. And that is something that we have to have a really frank conversation. How do we address that? How do we modernize it?
Victoria, in last night's debate, we showed the clip, it was basically a back and forth between Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. But did family separation and the fact that there was basically a large refugee camp filled with children along the border, did that come up?
So the issue of immigration came up, but sadly the very human issue of the family separation fell to the background. What it came down to was border enforcement. So both candidates were asked what they would do to enforce the border. Beto O'Rourke talked about using technology, not wasting money on a border wall. Ted Cruz never really answered the question, but what he did spend his time talking about and touting was how the Border Patrol had endorsed him and how a bunch of sheriffs along the border counties had endorsed him as well. Texas, having the largest portion of the U.S.-Mexico border, is disproportionately impacted by immigration and the crisis of the family separation. And I was disappointed, extremely disappointed, that more time was not dedicated to this. Instead, we saw just kind of a superficial treatment of it.
So, Kasie Hunt, if Texas does not go blue, what are What are the chances that the Democrats could take the Senate? Do they diminish significantly?
Well, my sources are all telling me that, if anything, the phenomenon that we saw in the wake of the Kavanaugh hearings is continuing and deepening, and that it's looking more like Democrats could lose 2 to 3 seats in the Senate. If they lose Texas and they lose Tennessee, which was one of the ones that was, most affected by the Kavanaugh hearings, and then they lose North Dakota, another one, then they have to run the table everywhere else, Mika. And there's just, not a lot of likelihood that could actually play out. I mean, Bill Nelson's potentially in trouble in Florida. The polls have shown a mixed picture in Nevada, which is one of their pickup opportunities. So anything can happen. One never knows. But I would say that most of the people I'm talking to in the Democratic side are pessimistic about the Senate.
And Maria Teresa, what's your take on the House?
I think it's still a toss-up, and what we're going to see is, I encourage folks to really look at what's happening in the Central Valley, because the Central Valley of California has not only Republican leadership, but there really, really is a huge appetite right now for the participation that we hadn't seen. And I would also encourage folks to look at what's happening in Texas, not on the senatorial level, but the congressional level. They have really strong candidates that were basically former veterans that are going to give, Will Hurd a run for his money, and the folks in Austin as well. So it's going to be really, really tight, and I think that wave is coming, but it has to be boots on the ground and really focused. I think a lot of folks oftentimes read the polls, and the polls can actually basically suppress the vote. I encourage folks to just participate.
Maria Teresa Kumar and Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, thank you both.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be a nail-biter, actually, still ahead.